She showed up on his doorstep with nothing but a backpack, a scar, and the silence of someone who had seen too much. He was a single dad trying to raise a boy who hadn't spoken in years. No one wanted the job she came to take, especially not in the dead of winter, at a ranch buried in snow and ghosts. But sometimes the jobs no one wants lead to the lives no one dares to hope for. Before we begin this story of second chances, quiet courage, and the healing power of unexpected love, if you believe in kindness, in redemption, and in the strength of ordinary people, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories. Like this, stories that remind us that even in the coldest seasons, warmth can still find its way home. The first snow came earlier than expected that year. It blanketed the Oregon pines in thick silence, muffling even the distant howls of coyotes. The wind whistled through the long-forgotten hollows of the forest, cutting like truth through a lie. Out here, 15 miles from the nearest paved road, no one came unless they had a reason. And lately, Will Carter didn't have many visitors or reasons. He stood on the porch of the old timber-framed house, hands deep in his flannel coat pockets, staring at the frozen fields beyond. His boots were crusted with yesterday's snow. In the barn, a lame mule brayed. In the main house, silence reigned, except for the quiet scratch of colored pencils from the living room, where Eli, his 8-year-old son, was likely working on another one of his intricate animal sketches. The boy never spoke, not since the accident. Not one word in 3 years. Will exhaled slowly, his breath rising like smoke into the morning air. The job posting had been up for weeks. Nobody came. Until now. The sound of tires crunching over ice jolted him. He turned as a battered, mud-caked pickup creaked into view, its windshield smeared one headlight out. It stopped just before the porch, and the engine coughed once before dying. She stepped out without hesitation, a woman, late 20s maybe, in a weather-beaten army jacket and combat boots, her backpack worn thin and slung low. Her face was pale from the cold, but held a kind of hardened grace, like a statue that had survived war and rain and time itself. Her blonde hair was tucked into a tight braid, a military habit that hadn't left her. "Mr. Carter," she said. Will didn't answer right away. He was busy taking her in the stiff posture, the subtle limp, the scar that ran along her right eyebrow. "Soldier. Or used to be. You're here about the job?" he finally asked. She nodded. "Saw the flyer in Miller's Junction. Heard you need help." He almost laughed. You and 20 others heard the same. None of them showed up. "I'm not most people," she said flatly. That was obvious. Still, Will hesitated. Something about her. Maybe the shadows under her eyes, or the way her fingers twitched when they weren't holding something, put him on edge. This ranch wasn't a place for the wounded. It took everything you had just to keep up. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jenna Ross. I used to be a Marine." A pause. "Used to be a lot of things." Will crossed his arms. "This isn't easy work. You'll be in the barn before sunrise, snow or not. The animals don't care what your story is. Most of them don't like people much." Same, Jenna said, not missing a beat. He gave a short huff. She had nerve. He liked that. But it wasn't enough. "You've got trauma," he said bluntly. "I've seen it before. This place doesn't heal anybody. It just gives you chores and silence." "I'm not looking to be healed," Jenna said. "I'm looking to be useful." There it was the line that landed deeper than she probably meant it to. Will shifted, his jaw tightening. He thought of Eli curled on the couch in silence, drawing creatures that only spoke to him through paper. He thought of the nights he played guitar alone, pretending he didn't care that nobody listened anymore. He studied her one last time. "You'll stay in the East Room," he said, finally. "Barn call is 4:30. If you're late, you're gone." Jenna nodded once, understood. He turned and stepped inside, leaving the door open behind him. Later that afternoon, as Jenna unpacked in the drafty guest room, she noticed a sketch tacked to the wall by the light switch. A child's drawing, but detailed an owl perched on a snow-laden branch, eyes wide and yellow. She smiled faintly and traced a gloved finger over the paper. That night, she sat at the kitchen table eating stew in silence while Will reviewed inventory on a clipboard. Eli sat across from her drawing by lamplight, never looking up. At one point, Jenna glanced over and said quietly, "You're really good." Eli didn't answer, didn't flinch, but his pencil paused just for a second. In the quiet hours before dawn, Jenna woke to the sound of wind pressing against the window panes, and something else, a distant whimper. She slipped on her boots and followed the sound through the hallway to the back mudroom. There, curled up in a blanket near the heater, was a small injured fox. Its leg was splinted, its eyes tired but watchful. She crouched next to it and reached out slowly. "You're a survivor too," she whispered. Behind her, Will appeared, leaning on the door frame. "Eli brought her in last week. She won't eat unless someone's here." Jenna didn't move. "She's beautiful. He named her Cassie. Don't ask why. He doesn't explain names." Silence settled like snowfall between them. "You sure you're ready for this place?" Will asked finally. Jenna's eyes remained on the fox. "No," she said. "But I came anyway." And that was enough for now. The Oregon morning was a sharp breath against the skin, clean cold and unrelenting. Snow had fallen again overnight, powdering the pines and coating the fence posts in soft white edges. Everything looked peaceful from a distance, but up close, life on the ranch was far from gentle. Jenna was already outside when the sun rose. Her breath steamed in the air as she tugged hay bales from the shed, stacked them beside the pen where the rescued mule Joni waited impatiently. Her shoulders ached, her boots were soaked through, and the scar above her brow throbbed dully in the cold. But her mind was quiet. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't wake up thinking about the desert. The nightmares had been there, sure, but more distant, like radio static behind a thick wall. She preferred it this way. Just her, the animals, and the chores. She didn't have to explain anything. She didn't have to be anyone but the woman with the shovel and the silence. From the kitchen window, Will watched her work. He didn't mean to. But there was something unsettling and oddly admirable about how she moved, not gracefully but efficiently, like someone who'd stopped asking for sympathy and just got the job done. He'd expected her to quit by now. Most people who came out here quit on the second morning. Jenna didn't complain. She didn't make small talk. She didn't ask for warmth or kindness. And that was precisely why she kept him on edge. People like her were either running from something or toward something dangerous. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and turned to where Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, working on another drawing. Today, it was a pair of wolves' noses touching beneath falling snow. Will leaned down beside his son. "She's not so bad, huh?" he murmured. Eli didn't respond, but his pencil paused again just for a second, like the day before. Will didn't smile, but something softened around his eyes. Later that afternoon, Jenna brought a wounded owl into the barn. It had a busted wing and a wary, intelligent stare. She placed it gently on a folded blanket near the heater, then stood back and watched it tremble. Eli appeared at the door. She turned, surprised, but didn't move. He didn't say a word, just slowly walked to the owl and knelt beside it. His tiny fingers hovered just above its feathers, respectful, careful. "It's okay," Jenna said softly. "He's scared, that's all." Still no response. She waited. Then Eli looked up at her, straight into her eyes. It was only for a moment, but something passed between them. A flicker of understanding, like two people meeting, not for the first time, but the first time in a long time. That night, The owl was still alive. So was the silence, but it felt different now. The next morning, Will left Jenna in charge while he drove into town for supplies. A snowstorm was on the forecast. He didn't like the idea of being away, but the fuel tank for the generator was nearly empty, and Eli needed food that didn't come out of a can. "Storm's coming," he said, handing Jenna a list. "You see that owl start panning, you call the vet. If Eli gets anxious, I'll keep him busy," Jenna interrupted gently. Will raised an eyebrow. "I don't talk much," she added, "but I watch." That answer made him pause. He nodded once, then looked down at Eli. "You listened to her all right?" Eli stared up at his father, then shockingly gave the faintest nod. Will left with snow already starting to fall. Jenna kept the fire burning in the main house, while Eli sat by the window, sketching without pause. She checked the generators, cleaned out the stalls, fed Cassie the fox, watered the horses. Hours passed, like breaths, steady vital. But around dusk, the wind shifted, and the air turned urgent. A sharp snap rang out near the tree line like a branch cracking or ice breaking. Eli jumped. His pencil clattered to the floor. "Hey, Jenna," said coming up beside him. "You all right?" He stared out the window, eyes wide. Eli nothing. His body stiffened, his breathing shallowed. Jenna crouched beside him. "Look at me," she whispered. "You're safe." Still nothing. And then without a word, he grabbed her hand. Tight, like a lifeline. The gesture caught her off guard. No one had touched her like that in years. Not since. She swallowed. "Let's breathe," she said, guiding him. "In. Out." He followed her rhythm, hesitant at first, then steadier. The storm raged outside, but inside for a few minutes they were an island of calm. When Will returned that night covered in snow and with supplies strapped to his back, he stopped in the doorway. Eli was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Jenna was sitting beside him, arms folded, eyes closed, her breath slow and even. She looked at peace. Will didn't say anything. He didn't want to disturb whatever fragile moment this was. Instead, he stood there a long time, watching them in the half-light. He didn't know what to make of it. This woman, this soldier with her ghosts and grit, had somehow made his son safer in one night than he had in years. And that terrified him more than any snowstorm. By the fourth day, the snow was waist-deep in places. The wind was howling through every crack in the ranch's old wooden bones, and Will Carter was more certain than ever hiring Jenna Ross was either the best or the most foolish thing he'd done in years. She worked like a machine up before dawn, first in the barn, last to bed. Never late, never slacking. She never asked questions, never lingered where she wasn't wanted. And Will. He wasn't used to help. He didn't have to manage. He didn't like unpredictability. Not in his routine, not in his people, and certainly not in a woman who carried war in her eyes. He watched her now from the edge of the barn, her back turned as she tossed feed to the rescued chickens. Snow clung to her braid. Her face was taut, her mouth set like stone. She never smiled. Not once. Still, Eli had stopped flinching when she entered the room. That alone was something. Inside the house, Jenna peeled off her jacket and boots, her hands red from the cold. Eli sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by his usual quiet mess of pencils, scraps of paper, and torn field guides. He didn't look up when she came in, but she caught the way his hand stilled. She moved slowly, carefully. No sudden movements. "Hey," she said gently. "I made some tea. You want a cup?" No answer. She didn't expect one. But when she turned to pour her own, she heard something behind her, a faint shuffle. She looked back. Eli had moved his sketch pad slightly toward her, just a few inches, like a peace offering left on a doorstep. She sat beside him without asking. The drawing was of her, standing beside the injured owl from the barn, snow falling all around them. She was taller in the picture, more solid, strong, almost mythical. Jenna blinked. Is this me? Eli's pencil kept moving, but his eyes flicked toward hers just for a heartbeat, then back down. Thanks, she said softly. I never looked like this before. Still no words. But in that silence, something shifted. A crack in the wall. Small, but there. Later that evening, Will stood in the doorway of the mudroom, watching Jenna rub balm into the mule's injured leg. The animal had been abused before Will rescued her, and still spooked at loud noises or fast movements. Jenna, for some reason, didn't scare her. She trusts you, Will said, leaning against the frame. She knows I've been broken too, Jenna replied without turning. He didn't know how to answer that. So he didn't. After dinner, the generator flickered once and went out. Everything fell into darkness. Damn snow, Will muttered, grabbing a flashlight. Jenna stayed with Eli, lighting the kerosene lantern on the side table. The boy was curled up under a thick quilt, watching the flame dance with wide, silent eyes. He okay? Will called from the back. He's calm, Jenna replied. Calm's a good start. There was a pause, then her voice again, quieter. He doesn't speak at all. Will re-entered the room, wiping his hands on a rag. Not since the car accident. He and my wife were driving into town. Black ice. The car flipped. She didn't make it. Jenna looked at Eli. His eyes were closed now, but she knew he was listening. I'm sorry, she said. Will nodded. He saw the whole thing. I was working at the ranch that day. Took me 2 hours to get there. The words hung there between them like frost in the air. And you? He asked finally. What did you see? Jenna hesitated. Her throat tightened, her fists clenching slightly. Iraq. 2017. I was part of a patrol convoy. Roadside bomb hit the second Humvee. I was the only one who walked away. He didn't press her, just nodded once, like a man who knew grief didn't need elaboration to be understood. You ever talk about it? He asked. Once, she said. To a therapist in Spokane. He told me I should write it down. Said maybe someday I'd tell someone who mattered. Think this place matters. She looked at him. Really looked. I think it might. That night, the nightmares came again. She was trapped in the sand, her hand slick with blood, someone calling her name in the smoke. She heard the scream of metal, the roar of fire, the silence that followed. Jenna bolted upright, breath-ragged chest heaving, and then small footsteps outside her door. A pause. A knock. Soft. Barely there. She opened the door to find Eli clutching his sketch pad. I'm okay, she whispered. He didn't move, so she knelt and opened her arms. To her surprise, he stepped into them. And for the first time in years, Jenna Ross cried, not from fear, not from rage, but from something she couldn't name. Something like grace. In the morning, she found a new drawing waiting for her at the kitchen table. It was of the three of them, Jenna, Will, and Eli, standing together in the barn, with sunlight streaming through the rafters. The owl was perched on Jenna's shoulder, the fox at Eli's feet. Will had a guitar slung over his back. She traced the lines with her fingertips. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But she knew a wall had broken last night. And maybe something better was being built in its place. The day began with wind, howling, restless wind that slammed branches against the roof and chased the snow across the yard in sweeping arcs. But inside the house, something had changed. Jenna woke before sunrise as usual. The nightmare had come again, though this time it didn't shake her as violently. Maybe it was the warmth of Eli's small arms around her, or the drawing he'd left her of the three of them standing together, like a family not bound by blood, but something gentler, something chosen. She moved quietly down the hall, passing the boy's room. His door was cracked just enough for her to glimpse him sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing by flashlight. Focused. Calm. And suddenly, for the first time in forever, she wasn't afraid of morning. The barn was colder than usual. Frost glazed the water troughs. Jenna chipped it away with a hammer, her breath forming clouds as she worked. Cassie, the little fox, peered at her from the corner of her stall, with sleepy eyes. Jenna paused and crouched beside her. "You've got the right idea," she murmured, scratching behind the fox's ear. "Keep your head down, stay quiet, and don't let anyone too close." Cassie licked her fingers. Jenna almost smiled. Almost. By the time she returned to the house, Will was already up stoking the fireplace. He glanced at her without speaking. Their exchanges were rarely long, but that morning there was a different kind of silence, warmer somehow, less suspicious. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter. "I found a frozen pipe near the chicken coop," she said. "If it bursts, you'll lose half your line." Will nodded. "I'll look at it after breakfast." "I already patched it," she added. He looked up. "You used heat tape." She nodded once. "Wrapped and sealed. Should hold until spring." For the first time, Will didn't look at her like a stranger. He looked at her like someone he didn't have to carry, like someone who might be capable of standing beside him, not behind. He set the kettle down. "Thanks," he said, simple but sincere. Jenna shrugged, not trusting herself to speak. Instead, she turned to Eli, who sat at the table scribbling with quiet intensity. "What are you drawing today?" she asked, stepping closer. Eli tilted the page slightly toward her. It was a snowy owl wings, spread mid-flight feathers, detailed so precisely it looked ready to lift off the page. "It's beautiful," Jenna said. Eli gave no reply, but his pencil slowed. She waited a moment, then walked away to give him space. But Will had noticed. He always noticed. "That's the first time he's shown a drawing before it was finished," he said under his breath. Jenna turned, startled. "Really?" Will nodded. He used to show them to his mom. Not since. He didn't finish. Jenna looked at Eli again. Maybe he's trying to speak in the only way he knows. Later that afternoon, the wind let up, and the sky cleared just enough for a sliver of blue to stretch over the white horizon. Jenna was hauling feed from the truck when she heard a small, muffled sound behind her. She turned. Eli was standing at the edge of the barn, his drawing pad clutched to his chest. Jenna approached slowly. "Hey, buddy." He held out the pad. She took it gently and looked. It was her again, standing beside the owl, but this time with her hand outstretched, reaching for a child made of smoke and stars. Her heart clenched. "What is this?" she asked softly. Eli looked down. Then for the first time he lifted one hand, pointing to his own chest. Jenna went still. "You," she whispered. He nodded once. Firm. The drawing wasn't of her and the owl. It was of her and him. That evening, Will found Jenna sitting by the fireplace, the drawing still in her lap. He hesitated in the doorway. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "He sees me." Will came in, knelt beside her. "I think he does more than see you. I think he trusts you." "That's dangerous," she said. "I don't stay in places. I don't belong." Will's gaze was steady. "Maybe you just haven't found a place that deserves you." Jenna met his eyes, and something in her cracked open, not painfully this time, but gently, like frost thawing beneath sun-warmed earth. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked the halls in her thick socks, past Eli's door, past Will's closed room to the mudroom where the owl rested on its perch. She sat on the floor beside it, her arms wrapped around her knees. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "But this feels like the first real thing I've had in years." The owl blinked at her, silent and still. And then soft footsteps. She turned. Eli stood in the doorway in his pajamas, holding something in both hands. He crossed the room wordlessly and handed it to her, a tiny folded paper crane. Jenna took it carefully. "Did you make this?" Eli nodded. He reached out and touched her shoulder. Then just before turning to go, he looked into her eyes and whispered a single word. "Stay." Her breath caught. Her throat closed. Eli. But he was already gone, padding softly back toward his room. Jenna stayed on the floor, paper crane in hand, tears slipping silently down her face. And for the first time since the war, she felt something in her chest begin to stir. The cold deepened with every passing day. By mid-January, the Oregon forest was locked in a white silence so thick it swallowed even the birdsong. The snow lay heavy on the trees, and the wind howled through the valleys like a chorus of old ghosts. It was the kind of winter that crept into your bones and reminded you just how far from the world you really were. For Will Carter, it was a familiar kind of isolation. But this year, it didn't feel quite so hollow. There was Jenna now, quiet, steady, and strangely necessary, like a beam of light in a room he didn't realize had gone dark. And Eli, who used to sit for hours without meeting anyone's gaze, now left drawings for Jenna on her workbench each morning. Last night, he had even smiled at her. Smiled. That one fleeting moment haunted Will in the best way possible. The next morning started like any other. Jenna was in the barn early checking on Cassie and the owl. Eli was in the house curled up by the fire with a pencil in one hand and a half-eaten apple in the other. Will was chopping firewood down by the east shed, trying to beat the storm clouds that were building on the horizon. The woodpile was dwindling faster than usual. Between heating the house and keeping the barn warm for the animals, they needed a constant supply. Will didn't mind the labor, he welcomed it. The rhythm of splitting wood gave him something to hold on to, a kind of purpose that didn't ask too much of him. But he shouldn't have ignored the ache in his leg. It had been bothering him for a few days, a dull, stubborn pain from an old break he'd gotten back in his rodeo days, before life had a mortgage and a son who needed him. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself he still had time to finish. He was wrong. As he swung the axe down, his leg buckled beneath him. A sharp crack, not from the wood, but from inside him, sent him collapsing to the frozen ground. The axe slipped from his hand and landed inches from his boot. He tried to stand. The pain shot up his side like lightning. Will gritted his teeth and cursed under his breath. The snow was falling harder now, fast enough to blur the treetops. He looked around, no one in sight. The shed was a quarter-mile from the main house, and with the wind howling like this, no one would hear him call. He closed his eyes and drew in a breath through clenched teeth. Then footsteps crunching through snow. Jenna rounded the corner at a full sprint, eyes scanning until they locked on him. Will, she shouted already, dropping to her knees beside him. "What happened, leg?" he muttered. "Went out. Think I tore something. Can you move it?" He shook his head. "Okay," she said, assessing quickly. "We're not waiting for help. Arms around my neck. You'll throw your back out. I carried a man twice your size out of a firefight," she snapped. "Don't argue." Will blinked, stunned, but he complied, with a strength that came not just from muscle, but from something deeper. Grit, necessity, stubbornness. Jenna hoisted him up, bracing his weight as he hissed in pain. They moved slowly, inch by inch, through snow that dragged at their knees. It felt like forever. By the time they made it to the porch, both were soaked in sweat and half frozen. Jenna lowered him onto the bench, panting hard. "Stay," she ordered. "I'll get Eli. We'll patch you up." An hour later, Will was lying on the couch with his leg elevated, a bag of frozen peas resting on his thigh, and Eli tucked under his arm like a small, concerned shadow. Jenna was crouched nearby, wrapping his knee with a compression bandage from the emergency kit. "You're lucky," she muttered. "Could have been worse." Will exhaled slowly, face pale but composed. "You always this gentle, only with animals and children." He gave a dry chuckle. "Guess I'm both then." She didn't laugh, but her eyes warmed. Eli reached across his father's chest and handed Jenna a folded piece of paper. She opened it. Inside was a drawing of her, carrying Will through the snow-bold lines etched with urgency. She stood tall, even heroic. Will looked heavy and exhausted but safe in her arms. Tears welled in Jenna's eyes before she could stop them. "Eli," she whispered, This is beautiful." He looked at her just once, then leaned his head against his father's shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, after Eli went to bed, Jenna brought Will a cup of tea and sat across from him by the fire. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "For today." She shrugged. "You'd have done the same." "Maybe. But you did it without hesitating. That matters." A pause stretched between them, long but comfortable. "I've been on my own a long time," Will said, staring into the flames. "It's easier that way." "Safer." "I know," Jenna replied. He turned to her. "But today, you scared me." She frowned. "Because I lifted you." "No," he said quietly. "Because I didn't realize until it happened how much I trust you, how much Eli does. That's not something we give out easily." Jenna swallowed her voice tight. "I'm not planning to stay forever, Will. I never planned to stay this long." "I know. But I'm starting to wonder if that's fear, talking not truth." Will nodded slowly. "We don't expect forever. Just don't disappear without saying goodbye." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, for the first time, Jenna reached out and took his hand. It was rough and calloused, but warm. And in the quiet between them, something unspoken was passed, fragile but real. Trust. The days after the accident moved slower, softer, like the storm had taken something sharp with it as it passed. Will's leg was healing slowly but surely. The swelling had gone down, and with Jenna's help, he could limp from the couch to the porch without too much grumbling. Eli stayed close during the day, sketching by the fire or sitting with his father, sometimes holding Will's hand in quiet solidarity. And Jenna was still Jenna, efficient, observant, stoic. But something had shifted since the firewood incident. She no longer walked the property with that subtle edge of detachment. Now she lingered longer in the kitchen, sat nearer to Will in the evenings, and paused to rub Cassie's ears just a few moments more. There were no declarations, no obvious changes, but there was an invisible thread slowly weaving between them, tenderness disguised as routine. It was late afternoon when Will found her on the back porch, sitting alone on the steps with a cup of black coffee. The sky was streaked in pink and lavender, the kind of winter dusk that made everything feel briefly holy. He leaned against the doorframe, cane in hand. "You've been quiet today." She didn't look at him, just nodded. Some days are like that. He eased himself down beside her with a grunt. The wood was cold beneath him. They sat in silence for a while, watching the snow settle over the trees. "I had a dream last night," Jenna said eventually. Her voice was quiet, like she wasn't sure it should be said aloud. Will didn't respond. He waited. "I was back in Mosul. Dust in my mouth, burning tires, the smell of metal, and heat and fear. I could feel the weight of my vest, hear the static on the radio. Then I looked down and realized." She paused, her breath catching slightly. "I was holding Eli's hand." Will turned to her. He didn't speak, she added, but he looked at me, and he wasn't afraid. Not even a little. She shook her head and let out a dry, shaky laugh. "What kind of person dreams of bringing a child into a war zone Will didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a long breath, slow and steady. Maybe it wasn't a war zone, he said. Maybe it was just your mind's way of saying he trusts you enough to follow you wherever. Jenna looked at him then. Her eyes were glassy but focused. I don't trust myself, Will, she said. Not with something that matters. I've lost too many people. So have I. You didn't cause it. He met her gaze without flinching. Didn't I? I told my wife to take the back road that day. Said it would be faster. If I'd told her to stay, if I'd just said, take Eli tomorrow, she'd still be here. Silence settled like falling snow. They weren't just confessing anymore. They were exchanging weight, each trusting the other not to drop it. Jenna's voice broke the stillness. How do you live with it? I don't, Will said honestly. Not always. Some days I fake it. Some days I sing to the animals so Eli will hear a voice in the house. Some days I just survive until bedtime. She nodded as if she already knew. But then he does something small. Will continued like, hand me a drawing, or laugh at the fox chasing its tail, and I remember he's still here. I still have him. That's what keeps me from vanishing completely. Jenna exhaled, her shoulders loosening. You ever think about running every day? Why don't you? He gave a faint smile. Because every time I think about leaving, I imagine Eli waking up and asking where I went. And I realize I'd rather live with ghosts than leave him with new ones. Jenna went still, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. Then, without turning, she said, I think I stayed in this uniform because it made me feel like I still belonged to something. Even after the war, even when I was just sleeping in truck stops and hiding in diners. You still do belong, Will said. To what he looked at her. To us. She turned to face him now fully. Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it, he said simply. But I won't push you. I know what it's like to carry something heavy. I just don't want you to carry it alone. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. Not yet. That evening, Jenna tucked Eli into bed, an unspoken ritual they'd formed. He handed her a new sketch before closing his eyes. It was of the porch at sunset. She and Will sat side by side on the steps. Between them, a cup of coffee. Around them, a sky full of stars. There was no war in that drawing. No ghosts. Just light. She held the sketch to her chest for a long time after the lights went out. Downstairs, Will was strumming an old guitar, soft, tentative notes that filled the cabin like breath. Jenna stood in the hallway listening. The song was slow and familiar. Something folk. Something healing. He didn't see her standing there. But when the final note faded into the firelight, she stepped into the room and sat beside him. Play it again, she said quietly. He did. And this time, she rested her head against his shoulder. Not as a soldier. Not as someone broken. But as a woman learning for the first time in a long time what it meant to be held. Snow still covered the ground, in a thick, unyielding blanket, but the air had changed. It was softer now, the kind of winter air that hinted just barely at the possibility of spring. The days were a little longer, the silences in the house a little warmer. Something was growing in the stillness. Something like hope. One crisp afternoon, Jenna found herself in the barn brushing down the old mare Rose. The horse had grown gentler since her arrival, no longer flinching when touched. Like most things on the ranch, trust didn't come fast, but once earned, it stayed. She hummed quietly as she worked a tune her mother used to sing when Jenna was a girl. She didn't even realize she was doing it until she heard a soft scuffle behind her. Eli. He stood in the doorway, with his ever-present sketchpad clutched to his chest. She smiled at him, careful not to break the fragile spell. Hey, buddy. You okay? He didn't answer, just stepped forward and held out the sketchpad. Jenna wiped her hands on her jeans before accepting it. The moment she opened the page, her breath caught. It wasn't like the other drawings. This one was different, richer, more vivid. It was a full scene done in color pencil and charcoal. 3 figures stood in the center, Jenna, Will, and Eli. They were under the arching limbs of a pine tree, snow melting around their boots. Will had a guitar slung over his shoulder. Jenna held a bird in her hands, Cassie maybe. And Eli stood between them, holding both their hands. Above their heads in bold block letters, the boy had written just 2 words: "My family." Jenna's hands trembled. She blinked hard, swallowing the lump in her throat. Did you draw this today?" Eli nodded. Her voice cracked. "Can I show Will?" He hesitated, then slowly nodded again. Jenna reached out and touched his shoulder. "Thank you." Eli looked up at her, and for the first time there was no guardedness in his eyes. Just quiet trust. That evening, Will returned from the shed tracking snow through the back hall. He found Jenna by the fireplace, the sketch in her lap. When she handed it to him, his hand froze mid-air. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak for a long time. Jenna waited. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy. He's never drawn anything like this before. I know. He's never called us anything before. I know. Will sank onto the couch beside her, one hand still gripping the paper, like it might disappear. "He's telling us something," Jenna said softly. Will nodded. "He's telling us. He wants this to be real." They sat in silence, hearts full and fragile. After a moment, Jenna whispered, "Do you?" Will looked at her, then really looked. "More than I've wanted anything in a long time." The next few days felt like a new chapter. Laughter, quiet, tentative, appeared like sunlight through storm clouds. Jenna started cooking breakfast with Eli, letting him crack eggs and stir pancake batter. Will taught her how to check the solar panels, how to listen to the wind for incoming weather shifts. They moved like 3 parts of a whole. But even in peace, shadows linger. And the hardest truths have a way of rising when everything feels almost right. One night, while Jenna and Will were stacking firewood on the porch, Will broke the silence. "You're leaving in the spring, aren't you?" She froze. He didn't say it with accusation, just certainty. Jenna looked down at her gloved hands. That was the plan. He nodded. "You told me once you never stay in one place too long, because I never felt like I should." But now, she hesitated, then said, "Now, I don't know." Will looked out across the moonlit fields. "This isn't about forcing you to stay. I'd never ask that. But I need to know what this is, what we're building." Jenna's voice dropped. "You think I don't ask myself that every night? I think you're scared." She turned to him, eyes flashing. "I've lived in war zones. I've held dying men. You think I'm scared of a cabin in the woods and a quiet boy with a sketch pad?" Will didn't flinch. "No, I think you're scared of mattering again." The words hit like a hammer. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her eyes darkened. But he didn't take them back. "I think you're afraid that if you stay and this becomes real, it could be taken from you. Again." She looked away, jaw clenched. "You don't know what it's like." Will stepped closer. "Don't I? I lost the only woman I ever loved on a day that started with pancakes and ended in a hospital. I've held my son while he screamed in his sleep. I've wished more than once that I'd been the one in the car." Silence stretched between them. Then Jenna whispered, "So what do we do now?" He touched her hand gently. "We let ourselves hope." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go. Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Jenna stood alone in the mudroom, staring at the drawing still pinned to the wall. "My family." 2 words. 1 possibility. She reached up, traced her name written in Eli's scrawl beneath the sketch. Then she whispered, "Maybe. Maybe I can believe in this." And for the first time she did. The warning came in the form of wind, low at first, like a hum crawling through the trees, then rising with a vengeance, dragging dark clouds across the sky, as if night had decided to come early. By mid-morning, the air was thick with snow and tension. Will stood on the front porch, radio in hand, tuning between weather advisories. The signal crackled, but the message was clear. An Arctic front was moving in fast and hard. 30 inches in 12 hours, he muttered, shaking his head. Behind him, Jenna zipped up Eli's jacket and pulled a hat over his ears. "Is it bad?" she asked. Will gave her a look. "Bad enough I'm not risking another trip into town." He glanced at his truck, already frosted over, despite being parked just 2 hours. "We've got wood food backup fuel," he added. "If we ride it outright, we'll be fine." Jenna nodded. "What do you need?" He looked at her for a beat too long. She was calm like always, but her eyes were sharper now. Focused. "Ready. I need you to help me double-check the generator line and water heaters in the barn. If this thing knocks out the main grid, the animals will freeze." "I'm on it," she said, already grabbing gloves. Eli Will added, kneeling in front of his son. "You stay inside, okay? No wandering. I mean it." Eli nodded solemnly, then looked at Jenna as if to make sure she'd be near. She touched his shoulder. "I'll be right back." By late afternoon, the storm hit full force. Snow slammed against the windows like fists. Trees groaned under the weight. Ice formed on the porch steps faster than Jenna could salt them. Inside, the power flickered. Twice. The third time, it went out completely. Will lit lanterns while Jenna fired up the backup generator. The hum of its motor was a strange kind of comfort in the chaos. Eli stayed quiet, curled up with Cassie in a nest of blankets near the fire, sketching by flashlight. His pencil flew across the page with unusual speed, urgent focused. "Looks like a plan," Will said, watching him from the kitchen. Jenna peered over the boy's shoulder. "It's the barn," she whispered. "And us. There's a storm in the picture." And Eli's pointing at something. Will took a step closer. "He drew the owl," he said. "But it's missing." Jenna frowned. "We locked all the stalls. Everything was secured." Will opened his mouth to speak. Then they heard it. A howl. Not wind, something else. Something alive. Cassie stood up. Ears pricked. Eli dropped his pencil. Jenna was on her feet first. "That's the fox call?" Something spooked her. Will hobbled toward his coat. "No way we're going out in this." "She's not calling randomly," Jenna interrupted. "She's calling for help." Will hesitated, then cursed under his breath. "Be careful." "I will," she said. "Stay with Eli." She grabbed a flashlight, bundled into her coat, and vanished into the white. The wind nearly knocked her sideways the moment she opened the door. Snow blinded her vision. It clung to her lashes, her hair, her breath. But she pressed forward, one hand on the fence line, the other gripping the flashlight. The barn wasn't far, maybe 150 yards, but in the blizzard, it felt like a mile. Halfway there, she heard it again. A sound she couldn't explain. Not the fox, not the wind. A voice, no. Not a voice, a feeling. Something inside her chest pulling her, guiding her like a magnetic thread strung between her and someone else. She stopped heart racing, and then she knew. Eli. He was outside. She turned, scanning the white panic surging through her. And there, barely visible in the swirling snow, a small figure trudging toward the woods, arms crossed tightly against the wind. "Eli!" She screamed, but the wind stole her voice. She ran, slipping, falling, scrambling up again. She caught up to him just as he stumbled over a snowdrift and fell face first into the bank. Eli. She grabbed him, hauling him to his feet. His cheeks were red, his lips blue-tinged. "What were you thinking?" she gasped, shielding him with her coat. "You could've." "I heard it," He whispered, his voice so faint she almost missed it. Her heart stopped. You spoke. He nodded. I heard the owl calling. I knew she was lost. I had to find her. Jenna stared at him in disbelief. Then the tears came hot and fast, despite the cold. She pulled him to her, holding him so tight he gasped. Don't ever do that again, she said. You matter too much. He clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder. And in that moment, amid the howl of the blizzard, the war inside her stilled. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was his. By the time they made it back to the house, Will was pacing the front room, panic carved deep into every line of his face. When the door burst open and Jenna stumbled in, soaked and trembling, carrying Eli against her chest, he froze. Then ran. He wrapped them both in his arms, gripping them like he might never let go. Eli looked up at his father and whispered, I'm sorry. Will broke, fell to his knees, and wept. Jenna crouched beside them, arms around both. They sat that way for a long time, 3 souls held together in the eye of a storm. Later that night, the fire crackled, casting flickers of gold across the drawing Eli had made before he left. Jenna unfolded it. The barn, the storm. A small owl perched atop a branch, wings outstretched. But this time, 3 figures stood beneath it, not running, not afraid. Together, the storm passed sometime before dawn. Jenna knew not because the house grew warmer, or because the wind had stopped clawing at the windows, but because the silence that followed felt different, not like absence, but relief. A kind of hush that came when something wild and dangerous had retreated, leaving the world intact. The wood stove crackled gently in the background. Eli was still asleep beside her on the couch, his small hand wrapped around hers like a tether. His cheeks had color again. His breathing was steady. Will sat nearby in the armchair, arms crossed over his chest, eyes trained on the 2 of them, as if afraid that blinking might somehow undo it all. I didn't hear him come downstairs, Will whispered. He came through the back, Jenna said, voice low. Said he heard the owl. Thought she needed him. Will shook his head slowly. It's my fault. I should have. No, she interrupted gently. He acted on compassion. You taught him that. Will looked at her, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. You saved him. She didn't answer right away, because the truth was he had saved her too. Later that morning, with the sky finally clear and the snow glinting like diamonds, Will limped outside to survey the property. The drifts were deep, but the barn had held. The fences still stood. Even the old apple tree near the coop had survived with only 1 broken limb. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Back inside, Jenna was folding blankets, her movements calm but distant. Will watched her for a long time. Say what's on your mind, she said, not looking up. I've been thinking, he said. About what you said. About not belonging. She paused. And I don't buy it anymore. She gave a soft laugh. That makes 1 of us. No, listen. He stepped closer, wincing slightly. You came here looking for a job. You found a home. That matters. Don't confuse gratitude with permanence. Jenna. She turned to him. I don't want to hurt either of you. And if I stay and then leave later, what does that do to Eli? Will studied her, choosing his words carefully. What if staying doesn't hurt him? He asked. What if leaving does? She looked away. He stepped forward, voice steady. You think Eli reached out to you because you were useful. He reached out because he trusts you, because you're safe. And for the first time since his mother died, he sees something that feels like family. I don't know how to be a family anymore, she whispered. I barely know how to be myself. Will reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Maybe we figure it out together. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. She squeezed his hand once and let go. I need time, she said. Will nodded. Just don't disappear, please. She looked at him then, full on. I'm not going anywhere, not without saying goodbye. That night, Jenna sat on the floor of Eli's room while he drew the two of them surrounded by books and silence. Cassie curled at their feet. Eli finished a sketch and handed it to her. This one was simple: a small house, a tall tree, 3 stick figures, Jenna, Will, and Eli, standing beneath it, and next to them, written in soft block letters, "Don't go." Jenna's throat closed. She looked at him. You want me to stay?" Eli nodded. "Why?" He hesitated, then pointed to her chest. "You listen here," he whispered. It was barely a sound, but it shattered something deep in her. She reached out and pulled him into her arms. He didn't resist. "I want to stay," she whispered into his hair. "I really do." And for the first time, she meant it with every inch of her heart. The next morning brought blue skies and the sound of dripping snow. The thaw had begun. Jenna found Will on the porch tuning his old guitar. He glanced up as she stepped outside. "Morning," he said. She sat beside him. He strummed a soft chord. "Eli told me what he said." She nodded. "He's right," she said. Will set the guitar down. "I've been running for years," Jenna continued, "even when I was standing still. But this place, Eli, you stopped the running. I didn't expect that. I didn't know how much I needed it." He reached for her hand again, and this time she held it tightly. "I'm not asking you to promise anything," he said. "I just want to keep building what we've started." She smiled then, genuine and bright, like sunlight on new snow. "Let's build it," she whispered. He leaned in, brushing her forehead with his. "No more goodbyes." "No more," she said, then added, almost teasing, "But I still get the East Room." He laughed, and the sound warmed her all the way through. Later that evening, Eli drew another sketch. He didn't show it to anyone, just taped it gently to his bedroom wall. It was a picture of the ranch, bathed in golden light with 3 shadows standing side by side. He labeled it in neat little letters. Now. Not someday. Not maybe. Now. And finally, the boy who didn't speak had said everything that mattered. Winter lingered, but it no longer felt like an enemy. The snow still fell, but softer now, like a memory instead of a burden. The kind of snowfall that blanketed the world in quiet rather than isolation, and reflected the sun in ways that made the sky look bluer, the pine trees greener, and the world just maybe a little more forgiving. The thaw had begun, not just in the fields and fences, but in hearts long frozen. It was Jenna who suggested the gathering. Will nearly choked on his coffee when she brought it up. "A party," he repeated. "Out here." She shrugged, half smiling. "A small one. Just the neighbors. A pot of chili, maybe some cornbread. Let people know we're alive." He arched a brow. "You sure you're up for that? I think I owe it to Eli," she said. "To show him this life isn't just survival. It can be shared." Will nodded. "All right. But I draw the line at karaoke." Jenna smirked. "Good, because I only know war songs and Johnny Cash." They set the date for the following Saturday. The invitation was simple handwritten notes delivered to the handful of ranchers and families scattered across the valley. No RSVP, no pressure. Just warmth offered on a cold evening. To Jenna's surprise, people came. The yard filled with parked trucks and boot prints in the snow. Children tumbled out in mittens and wool hats, chasing each other through the drifts. Couples brought casseroles and jars of preserves. A neighbor from 3 miles north brought a banjo. Will in flannel and jeans greeted each guest like a man learning to live in color again. And Eli, wide-eyed, but not overwhelmed, stayed by Jenna's side, his hand never far from hers. The kitchen was full of laughter and the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. In the living room, chairs were pulled close together, forming a circle around the fire. Jenna noticed how the house, once so filled with silence, now echoed with life. She stood back for a moment, quietly watching, and then she felt it. A hand in hers. Eli. He looked up at her, a small, knowing smile on his face. "Come," he said, simply. He led her to the center of the room, where Will sat tuning his old guitar. The murmurs fell quiet. Will looked up, surprised but pleased. Eli looked between them. "Play it," he said. Will hesitated. "You sure?" The boy nodded. Jenna glanced around. Every eye in the room was waiting. Will gave a small, humble smile. "All right." He started to play. The melody was gentle, almost hesitant at first. Just a few wandering chords, then a rhythm slow and steady like footsteps through snow. Jenna didn't recognize the song. She wasn't sure anyone did. But it didn't matter, because it wasn't a song meant for charts or stages. It was a song meant for here, for now. As the notes spilled into the warm room, Eli climbed onto Jenna's lap and rested his head against her chest. She closed her eyes and let the sound carry her. Through fear, through silence, through every goodbye she'd ever whispered into the void, and into something else. Belonging. When the last note faded, the room stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual. Then soft applause. Someone cleared their throat. Another called, "Play." Another. Will smiled but shook his head. "That's the only one I needed to play tonight." Jenna looked at him, and in his eyes, she saw everything he hadn't said. "Stay. You matter. This is your place now, too." And she answered without speaking. "I know. I believe it. I'm not going anywhere." After the guests left, and the house quieted once more, Jenna and Will stood outside on the porch, watching the moon cast silver over the snowy fields. Eli was asleep inside. Cassie curled at his feet, and the old owl nestled high in the barn rafters again. Jenna held a mug of tea in her hands, steam curling up in the cold night air. Will glanced at her. "You're really staying, aren't you?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." What changed? She exhaled, watching her breath drift skyward. "I stopped thinking I had to earn peace." Will reached for her free hand. "You don't have to earn it," he said. "You just have to choose it." Jenna smiled. "Then I choose it. I choose this." Will leaned in and kissed her gentle, certain, and full of everything they'd both thought they'd lost forever. And for the first time in years, the music didn't come from a guitar, or a song, or even a voice. It came from the stillness of knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be. Spring arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet persistence. The snow melted in slow rivers down the hillsides. The air grew softer, the mornings brighter. Tiny green shoots poked through the earth, tentative but determined, like all things that had endured a long, hard winter. Life on the ranch adjusted accordingly. Chores changed from chopping firewood to mending fences, from warming water troughs to chasing chickens out of the early garden beds. The pace didn't slow, but it breathed easier. And Jenna Ross breathed easier too. She had unpacked her final duffel last week. It sat empty now beneath the bed in the East Room, the room that no longer felt like a guest space, but hers. She had replaced the military issue blanket with a soft, faded quilt that Will found in a trunk. She hung Eli's drawing, the one that read, "My Family," above her desk. It felt right there. She no longer counted the days. She planted herbs in the windowsill. She learned to laugh without guilt. One morning in April, Jenna sat on the front porch, sipping coffee, while Eli played in the grass with Cassie and a ball made of knotted twine. Will was fixing the fence in the far pasture, his figure moving slowly but steadily across the horizon. The light hit the hills just right, and Jenna caught herself smiling. Not the quiet, reserved kind she'd worn for years, but something fuller. freer. She reached for her journal, the one the VA counselor in Spokane had urged her to keep. She hadn't touched it for nearly 2 years. But today she opened it and wrote, "I came here as someone surviving. I'm staying because I became someone alive." She paused, tapped her pen against the edge of the page, then added, "I never thought the best days of my life would begin with a job no one wanted. But maybe that's how all good stories begin, in the quiet places, with the unexpected people, and in the middle of healing you didn't know you were looking for." That evening after dinner, Eli tugged on Jenna's sleeve and handed her a folded piece of paper. "Another sketch?" she asked. He nodded, shy but proud. She opened it slowly and gasped. It was a picture of the house, the porch, and the fields painted in soft, warm colors. She stood in the center, arms outstretched, and Eli was in her arms. Will stood nearby, strumming a guitar, and above them, written in blocky, imperfect letters, "Home." She blinked quickly, then bent down and cupped Eli's face in her hands. "I love it," she whispered. "I love you." And for the first time, Eli whispered back, "I love you too." Days turned to weeks. Jenna helped Will reopen an old vegetable patch. She taught Eli how to plant rows, how to speak softly to the soil, how to let things grow in their time. They began painting the barn together, red like tradition, but with white trim that Jenna insisted made it look like hope-wearing boots. One afternoon, Will handed her a small box with no explanation. Inside was a key. She looked up at him, confused. "To the house," he said simply. "You never asked for it. But you've had it all along." Her hands trembled as she accepted it. No one had ever trusted her with something so quiet and powerful. On a warm Sunday in May, the three of them packed a basket and walked to the clearing near the creek where wildflowers had begun to bloom. Eli brought his sketch pad. Will brought his guitar. Jenna brought nothing but herself. They lay on the grass and looked up at the sky, letting the moment settle deep into their bones. Will turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You ever think you'd have this?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, but I think I always hoped I was wrong." He kissed her, then slow, certain, and full of everything they'd fought to feel again. Eli didn't giggle or roll his eyes. He just smiled, turned a page, and drew the moment. That night, Jenna returned to her journal. One more entry. One more truth. "I used to believe my life was divided into before and after the war. Now I know better. It's divided into before this family and after I found them. The woman I was, hardened, guarded, afraid, she didn't disappear. She just became someone new, stronger, softer, still fierce, but now for love. The soldier in me still wakes, early still listens for the quiet. But now, when I open my eyes, I hear the sound of Eli's footsteps and the strum of Will's guitar. And I know, without doubt, without fear, these are the best days of my life." She closed the journal and left it open on the nightstand. Outside, a warm breeze stirred the wind chimes. Inside, laughter echoed up the stairs. And in the quiet that followed, 3 hearts beat in rhythm, no longer broken, just full, just home. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's a small town, a big city, or just a quiet corner of the world you call home. It's amazing how stories like this can bring us together, no matter the distance. And if you'd like to hear more heartfelt stories about kindness, resilience, and unexpected love, feel free to subscribe to the channel. We're building a small but special community here, and there's always room for you. Finally, thank you truly for spending your time with us today. We know your time is precious, and we're honored that you chose to share a piece of it with this story. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep believing in the quiet power of good people.